The soil of the Campanian countryside was rich for some, but not for Marcus's family. The land they worked was not their own. It belonged to a landlord who lived miles away in a villa of marble and mosaic. Publius, Marcus's father, leased it at a price that drained away the little it gave. Every season began with hope, and every season ended with disappointment. From the moment he could walk, Marcus's life was bound to that soil. At 7 years old, he carried water jars heavier than his arms could bear, stumbling through furrows to where his father struggled with the plow. By 10, he was guiding a stubborn ox, shouting until his throat went raw. By 12, his back bore the same stoop that had bent Publius's spine. There was no escape from toil. Sunrise meant work. Sunset meant exhaustion. And in between, hunger gnawed at his belly like a second master. The father's burden. Publius was a man molded by struggle. His hair had thinned early. His beard carried streaks of gray long before age should have taken it, and his hands were a map of scars. But his eyes, dark, steady, unblinking, spoke of a will that refused to break. "Strong arms, Marcus," he would say as they labored side by side. "Strong arms will keep you alive when the world forgets you." He never spoke of greatness, only survival. His life had been a chain of seasons: plow, sow, reap, pay the landlord, and still be left with nothing. He wanted more for his son, though he had no language for what more might be. Sometimes, when the day's work was done, Publius told stories by the fire. His voice carried the rhythm of memory, and Marcus would sit wide-eyed as his father spoke of soldiers marching in gleaming armor, of generals who conquered faraway lands, of gladiators who fought before roaring crowds. Publius told these tales as warnings, examples of men chewed up by war and spectacle. But Marcus heard them differently. He heard possibility. The mother's love. Livia, Marcus's mother, was the heart that kept the family beating. She was not soft in body. Her hands were rough, her arms wiry from carrying bundles of wood and baskets of grain, but she was soft in spirit. Where Publius carried silence, she carried song. Even in the depths of winter, she would hum as she worked, small melodies that pushed back the cold. Meals were her battlefield. She could turn a handful of lentils into a stew that warmed the bones. She stretched bread until it fed 3 when it was barely enough for 1. And when food was scarce, she quietly gave her share to Marcus, claiming she was not hungry. At night, she brushed his hair with her fingers and whispered, "You are my strength, Marcus. Remember that, when the world feels too heavy." Her love was fierce, and it was constant. The hunger season. There was one winter Marcus never forgot. The rains had failed, the harvest shriveled, and hunger descended like a plague. The landlord's collectors came regardless, demanding their share. Publius handed over sacks of grain so small they looked like mockery. The collectors sneered and spat, muttering about debts and punishments before riding off with more than Marcus thought fair. That season, meals dwindled to once a day. Livia boiled weeds gathered from the roadside, pretending they were herbs. Publius grew thinner, his cough deepening. Marcus's ribs began to show, sharp beneath his skin. He learned the ache of an empty belly, the dizziness that came from standing too quickly, the way hunger made men snarl at one another. He also learned the quiet heroism of his parents, who starved themselves so that he might eat another bite. Moments of joy still, poverty did not strip away all joy. On festival days, when the village gathered in the square, Marcus felt almost like any other boy. He remembered one spring when his father carved him a wooden sword from a broken plow handle. "Every gladiator begins with wood," Publius said with a rare smile. Marcus swung it fiercely, chasing other boys until they tumbled in the dust, laughing. For a moment, he was not a farmer's son, not a hungry child, but a warrior of his own imagining. His mother clapped, her thin hands red from kneading dough, her eyes shining with pride. That night, Marcus fell asleep clutching the wooden sword to his chest, dreaming of crowds chanting his name. A glimpse of glory. It was on a hot afternoon years later that Marcus saw real gladiators. A troop passed through the village on their way to Capua, where games were to be held. The men marched in a loose column, bare-chested, their bodies gleaming with oil. Some wore helmets with plumes, others carried shields that looked like walls of bronze. They bore scars like trophies, and their swagger turned every head. The villagers paused their work to watch. Children ran to the roadside, pointing and shouting. Marcus stood frozen, water jar forgotten in his hands. One gladiator, tall and scarred, glanced at him as he passed. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Marcus saw not chains or blood, but power. Power that demanded attention, that turned a nobody into someone the world could not ignore. The moment seared itself into him. From then on, every swing of the plow became in his mind a sword stroke. Every heavy bucket was a shield, every blister was training. He told his parents that night. Publius only shook his head. "They bleed for the crowd, boy. Don't mistake chains for crowns." Livia took his face in her hands, her eyes wet. "Dreams can lift you, Marcus, but they can also break you." Marcus said nothing, but in the silence of his heart, he made a vow. The vow he would not die bent over the soil like his father. He would not fade quietly into hunger like his mother. He would not be forgotten in a nameless village. One day, he swore, the world would know his name. The failing body. The cough began as a nuisance, nothing more than a rasp in Publius's throat after long days in the field. But the seasons wore on, and the rasp deepened into a rattle that shook his chest. By the time Marcus was old enough to lift the plow alone, his father's strength was failing. Publius tried to hide it. He still rose before dawn, still forced his body into the fields, still set his hands to the plow. But Marcus saw. He saw the way his father paused when he thought no one was looking, bent double and gasping for air. He saw the sweat that broke across his brow even in cool weather. He saw the red stains in the cloth his father pressed to his mouth when the cough tore through him. "Just dust in the lungs," Publius muttered when Marcus caught him once. But Marcus knew better. Dust didn't make a man spit blood. The burden shifted quietly onto Marcus's shoulders. He carried the water, tilled the soil, repaired the hut when storms stripped the roof. His arms hardened, his back grew broad. But he was still only a boy trying to do a man's work. The mother's sacrifice. Livia worked harder than either of them. She labored in the fields when Publius could not, and then came home to tend the hearth, mend clothes, and barter in the village market for scraps. Her face thinned, cheekbones sharp beneath her skin. Her hands cracked and bled in the winter cold. Still, she smiled at Marcus every evening, as if she could shield him with her eyes from the harshness of their world. Meals grew smaller. Bread became rarer. Livia always ate last, pushing her share toward Marcus with a wave of her hand. "I've had enough," she would say, though her stomach growled loud enough for him to hear. One night, Marcus caught her alone, bent over the pot, dropping in a handful of weeds she had gathered from the roadside. "It will taste better," she said quickly when she saw him watching. Her smile was brave, but her eyes betrayed her. Marcus understood then. His mother was starving herself to keep him alive. The landlord's man poverty was not only hunger, it was humiliation. Every season, the landlord's man rode into the village to collect his due. He was tall and fat, his cloak trimmed with dyed wool, his horse sleek and well-fed. He looked at the villagers as though they were less than animals, fit only to work the soil for his master. When he came to Marcus's hut, Publius bowed his head and offered what little grain they had. The man sneered, spat, and demanded more. "Your debts grow, farmer," he said, his voice oily. "The landlord does not forgive. If you cannot pay in grain, you will pay in flesh. A son, perhaps." That boy of yours looks strong." Marcus felt the words like a knife. His mother pulled him close, her fingers tight on his arm. His father straightened, trembling with anger, but said nothing. Silence was the only defense they had. When the man left, Publius smashed his fist against the wall until his knuckles split. Livia wept quietly in the corner. Marcus sat in the middle of it all, his chest burning with fury. He hated the landlord, hated the collectors, hated the chains of debt that bound them tighter than iron. And he hated his own helplessness. Dreams against despair. At night, when his parents thought him asleep, Marcus lay awake staring at the rafters. The hunger in his belly, the sound of his father's coughing, the memory of the landlord's sneer, these things pressed on him like stones. But above it all, he held fast to the dream. He pictured the gladiators he had seen marching through the village, their gleaming muscles, their swagger, the way the crowd would roar their names. He imagined himself among them, sword in hand, shield raised. No longer a nobody scraping at the dirt, but a man the world could not ignore. He whispered his name into the dark as though speaking it into destiny. Marcus. And though fear gnawed at him, though poverty tried to crush him, he swore again, he would not die unknown. The father's words. One evening, after another day of poor harvest and endless toil, Publius called Marcus to sit with him outside. The sky was painted with fading light, the fields stretching into shadow. "You've grown strong," his father said, voice thick with pride. "Stronger than me." He coughed, spat red into the dirt, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I've given my life to this land, Marcus, and what has it given me? Nothing but scars. Don't let it take your life too. If you see a chance for more, take it. Don't be a slave to the soil." Marcus's throat tightened. "But what about you? What about Mother?" Publius's hand, rough and scarred, gripped his shoulder. "You carry us with you, always. But your path, it won't be here. The shadow ahead." The words haunted Marcus. He wanted to believe them, wanted to believe he was meant for something greater. But each day the fields pulled him back. Each night, hunger reminded him of their chains. And deep down, he knew. The world was closing in. The debts were growing. His father was fading. His mother was starving herself for him. It was only a matter of time before the landlord's man returned and made good on his threat. Marcus didn't yet know the shape of his fate, but he could feel it looming, as sure as storm clouds on the horizon. A village bound in chains. Marcus's village was small, barely more than a cluster of mud brick huts and thatched roofs scattered along a dirt road. A crooked well sat in the center, its stones worn smooth from years of hands pulling water. Chickens wandered freely. Dogs barked at strangers but slept at the feet of children. Life here was simple, but simplicity was not kindness. Every family owed grain or coin to the landlord, and each year the debts grew like weeds. Men bent their backs in the fields until they could no longer stand straight. Women bore children who often died before they could walk. Old age was rare. Most villagers looked twice their years by the time they reached 30, but still, they endured. Endurance was the only thing they had. Marcus knew every face. Old Tullius, who had lost an eye in war and returned to scratch at the soil with one hand. The widow Cassia, who made cheese from goat's milk and sold it at market. The twins Lucan and Felix, boys his age who laughed loud but were thin as reeds. These were the people he grew among, each of them bent by the same weight, poverty and the landlord's grasp. And though Marcus loved his village, he hated its cage. The father's decline. Publius had once been strong enough to carry 2 sacks of grain at once, his shoulders broad, his arms thick with muscle. But sickness was stronger. It hollowed him, shrank him, and bent him until he looked more like a shadow than a man. The cough came at night, worst of all. The hut echoed with it, rattling the walls, shaking the roof beams. Marcus would lie awake, fists clenched, wishing he could rip the sickness out of his father's chest with his bare hands. But all he could do was fetch water, rub his father's back, and watch him spit blood into rags. Livia tried remedies, boiled herbs, honey when she could barter for it, even charms whispered by the village healer. Nothing lasted. One evening, when Marcus tried to take the plow alone, Publius insisted on helping. He collapsed before the ox had taken 3 steps. Marcus caught him before he hit the earth. The shame in his father's eyes that day burned Marcus deeper than any hunger. Publius had always been the pillar, the one who bore the world on his shoulders. Now Marcus felt the weight sliding onto his own, the mother's desperation. Livia did not weep often, but Marcus saw her shoulders shake sometimes when she thought herself alone. She carried water from the well, her back bowed, her face drawn, and Marcus heard her whisper prayers under her breath. Pleas to the household gods, to Fortuna, to anyone who might listen. When the harvest failed again, she grew desperate. She went to the landlord's man herself, begging for more time. Marcus followed her in secret, creeping along the path until he saw her kneeling in the dirt, hands clasped, while the fat man on the horse sneered down at her. "Time," the man laughed. "Time is coin, woman. Your family has neither." She lowered her head. "Please, my husband is sick. My son is still a boy. We will pay. I swear it." The man leaned closer, voice oily. "Perhaps your boy could work off what you owe. The landlord always has use for strong backs. Or perhaps there are other ways for a woman like you." Marcus clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. He wanted to run at the man, to tear him from his horse, but Livia only bowed lower, whispering again for mercy. The man spat into the dirt and rode away, laughing. Marcus waited until his mother walked back, her face pale, her eyes swollen but dry. She did not see him. She never told Publius what had been said, but Marcus never forgot. The children of hunger. Hunger was not Marcus's alone. Every child in the village wore the same ribs sharp beneath skin, the same hollow cheeks. Sometimes Marcus played with Lucan and Felix near the well, chasing chickens, throwing stones, pretending sticks were swords. But their games always ended the same way. Tired, too tired to play, sitting in the dust with empty bellies. The richer villages nearby mocked them, calling them hollow bellies when they came to market. Marcus hated it, hated the shame of being seen as less than whole. One winter, when hunger bit hardest, Lucan collapsed while carrying water. Felix screamed for help, but by the time the healer came, Lucan's breath was shallow, his lips pale. He survived, but he never grew strong again. Marcus watched all this with wide, burning eyes. He learned early that poverty was not just hard, it was a thief. It stole strength, laughter, even life. Moments of fleeting joy. And yet, amid the shadows, there were sparks of light. At the spring festival, when the villagers gathered to honor the gods of the fields, Livia baked flatbread with honey she had saved for months. The sweetness burst in Marcus's mouth, and for a moment he felt rich as an emperor. Musicians played flutes and drums. Children danced in circles, their thin bodies swaying, their laughter carrying over the fields. Even Publius, pale and coughing, managed a smile as he watched Marcus swing his wooden sword in mock battle with Felix. For a few hours, the world seemed brighter, as though hunger and debt did not exist. But when the festival ended, the landlord's collectors came again, and the joy fled with them. The debt's shadow. The word debt became a chain in Marcus's mind. He heard it everywhere. Whispered among neighbors, spat by the landlord's man, muttered by his father at night when he thought Marcus asleep. Debt meant hunger. Debt meant shame. Debt meant one day someone would come to take something, or someone, that could not be given back. And Marcus knew, though no one spoke it aloud, that he was the something, they would take. He was strong. He was young. He was valuable. The thought terrified him, and yet, part of him longed for it. Better to be taken into the world of men, into the path of gladiators and soldiers, than to rot, forgotten in the soil. The father's confession. One night, when the stars burned bright and the air was still, Publius called Marcus outside. His voice was weak, his breath ragged. "I have nothing to give you, son," he said. "No land, no coin, no inheritance. Only this body that has already failed me." Marcus tried to protest, but his father silenced him with a look. "I have failed at life, Marcus, but you are different. I see it. I know it. You were not born for this mud." He placed a hand on Marcus's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat. "When the time comes, do not resist it. Do not cling to us. Go. Make your name. Live for all of us." Marcus swallowed hard, blinking back tears. His father's words were both blessing and curse. The weight of tomorrow. As weeks turned into months, Marcus carried those words like a burden and a beacon. He still worked the fields, still cared for his mother, still tried to hold the family together. But he knew the truth. The world was closing in. The landlord's man would return. Debts would be called. His father would not live many more winters. And Marcus would be forced into a future that frightened him as much as it thrilled him. He began to train in secret, swinging his wooden sword until his arms ached, running across the fields until his lungs burned, pushing his body because he believed deep down that one day he would need strength greater than hunger, greater than poverty, greater even than despair. For though he was the son of a poor farmer, and a mother who starved herself to feed him, Marcus whispered again each night into the dark, "I will not be forgotten." The long winter. The year turned colder than any Marcus could remember. Frost clung to the fields even at midday, and the soil cracked beneath the plow like stone. The oxen grew thin. Their ribs showed like Marcus's own. Food dwindled. Firewood grew scarce, and every breath of wind seemed to cut straight through flesh into bone. Inside their hut, the air was no warmer. Smoke from the hearth clung to the rafters, acrid and choking. Marcus's father coughed constantly, each fit rattling the thin walls. His mother's hands were red and raw from chopping wood, hauling water, kneading dough from flour so coarse it cut the tongue. Marcus carried the weight of survival now. At dawn, he trudged to the fields, dragging the plow, breaking the earth alone while his father sat hunched nearby, too weak to rise. He gathered reeds from the riverbank for kindling, trapped rabbits in the woods with snares he fashioned himself, and begged scraps from neighbors when their own pots boiled. At night, when exhaustion pressed heavy on him, Marcus lay awake listening to his father's breath. Each wheeze sounded thinner than the last. He wondered if one night the sound would stop altogether. The father's weakening. Publius had grown gaunt, his once powerful shoulders shrinking until his tunic hung loose. His cough brought blood so often now that the rags his mother washed each morning were stained deep crimson. Still, Publius tried to carry himself with pride. He spoke to Marcus as though nothing had changed, giving advice on the plow, on sharpening tools, on how to read the sky for signs of rain. But Marcus could see the truth in his eyes. His father was dying, and he knew it. One evening, as Marcus mended a broken hoe, Publius placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You work harder than any boy I've seen," he rasped, "harder than many men. But this—" He gestured weakly at the fields outside. "This is not the life meant for you." Marcus swallowed. "Then what life is meant for me?" His father's lips curved into the faintest smile. "One greater than mine. You'll see it when the time comes." Marcus didn't understand then. He only felt the heavy sadness in the words, like a farewell spoken too soon. The mother's quiet strength. Livia became both mother and father to the household as Publius faded. She rose before dawn, kneaded dough in silence, and wrapped shawls around her shoulders before stepping into the fields. She did not complain. She did not rest. Marcus often caught her staring at Publius when she thought no one noticed. Her gaze lingered on the hollow of his cheeks, the tremor in his hands, the way his cough bent him double. Sometimes tears welled in her eyes, but she always turned away before Marcus could see them fall. She fought for scraps at market, bartering with whatever little they had left. A chicken, a piece of cloth, a handful of beans. Once, Marcus saw her remove the necklace she had worn since he was a child, a copper pendant, her only ornament, and place it in the hand of a butcher in exchange for a slab of meat. Marcus wanted to protest, but her expression silenced him. There was no room for sentiment when survival was at stake. The collector returns. The landlord's man came again before winter's end, his cloak trimmed with fur, his horse sleek, while the villagers shivered in rags. "Debt is due," he announced at the well, voice carrying cold authority. The lord grows impatient. Marcus watched from the edge of the crowd as his mother stepped forward, a basket of grain in her hands. It was barely enough to last them 2 weeks. She held it out with trembling arms. The man peered inside and sneered. This is what you bring after months of delay? Insufficient." His eyes slid toward Marcus. "The boy has grown strong, I see. Strong enough to work for his lordship's house, perhaps?" Livia's face blanched. She clutched Marcus's arm protectively. "He is all we have left. My husband is ill. Please, we will find a way." The man's smirk widened. "There is always a way. Pay, or the boy goes. Next moon, I return." He tossed the basket back at her, spilling grain into the dirt, and rode off without another word. The villagers turned away, too fearful to meet Marcus's eyes. Shame burned hot in his chest. That night, Marcus swore silently to himself. If they came for him, he would not go as a slave. He would go as something else, something greater. The father's last days. As spring neared, Publius grew too weak to rise from his bed. His breaths came shallow, his skin pale, his eyes distant. Marcus sat by him, holding his hand. He had never seen his father look so small. "You'll be the man of the house now," Publius whispered one night. "Protect your mother. But remember, Marcus, your life must not be chained here. Promise me." Marcus's throat tightened. "I promise." His father's grip weakened, fingers slipping from his son's. His chest rose once, twice, then fell still. The silence that followed was unbearable. Marcus's mother pressed her face into her husband's chest and wept, her sobs muffled but endless. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the stillness where breath should have been. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. The funeral. In the village, funerals were humble. Publius was laid on a bier of reeds, his body wrapped in simple cloth. Neighbors came with offerings of bread, wine, and oil. The village elder muttered prayers to the gods of the underworld, asking that Publius find rest. Marcus helped carry his father's body to the pyre. His hands did not shake, but his heart hammered as flames rose, consuming the man who had taught him everything. Smoke curled into the sky, and Marcus whispered a vow to the rising ashes. "I will not waste what you gave me. I will not die in the dirt." Aftermath. The hut felt emptier without Publius. The cough was gone, but so was the warmth, the voice that had anchored them. Marcus now bore the weight of both son and father. He worked harder than ever, but the soil did not care. Crops withered, tools broke, hunger gnawed deeper. His mother grew thinner by the day, lines of exhaustion etched into her face. Debt still loomed. The landlord's man would return soon. Marcus could feel the noose tightening, pulling him toward a fate he could not escape. And yet, in the dark of night, when silence pressed around him, he repeated the words he had spoken to the ashes. "I will not die unknown." After Publius's death, the hut felt hollow. His absence was louder than his cough had ever been. Marcus would wake at night, expecting to hear it, only to meet silence so thick it pressed on his ears. Livia sat often by the fire, staring into the embers. She spoke less, smiled rarely, and carried herself with a weariness Marcus had never seen before. It was as if his father's death had carved half her spirit away. Marcus filled the silence with work. He tilled, chopped, mended, hunted, bartered. But no matter how much he did, it was never enough. Food was still scarce, debt was still heavy, and the threat of the landlord's return hung over them like storm clouds ready to break. The mother's resolve. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Marcus returned to find his mother sitting at the table with a clay jar in front of her. Inside was every scrap of coin, every crumb of copper they owned. She pushed it toward him. "This is all we have," she said. "I thought to hide it. But hiding buys nothing. When the collector comes, I will give it to him. Perhaps it will be enough." Marcus stared at the jar, at the pitiful handful of coins. He knew it would never satisfy the landlord's man. "Keep it," Marcus said bitterly. "Better we eat than starve to feed his greed." But his mother only shook her head. "If giving this buys even a little time, it is worth it. Every day you remain here is a victory." Marcus clenched his fists. "And when it runs out? When he comes again?" Her eyes softened, though her voice was steady. "Then we pray the gods have mercy." The return of the collector. The collector came as promised, his horse's hooves striking hard against the frozen ground. The villagers gathered reluctantly, dreading his shadow. Livia stepped forward, placing the jar at his feet. "This is all we can give. Please, we beg your mercy." The man crouched, rattled the coins, and laughed. This is not payment. This is an insult." His gaze slid toward Marcus. "The boy. He is worth more than this scrap of metal. I warned you." Livia dropped to her knees. "Please, he is all I have left. Take me instead. I will serve. I will work. But leave my son." The collector sneered. "A woman past her prime, thin as a reed. My lord has no use for you, but the boy, strong, broad-shouldered, he is worth something, perhaps to the arena." The word arena stung Marcus like fire. He had heard of it in whispers, a place where men fought like beasts for the amusement of the crowd. Few left it alive. The villagers murmured but did not intervene. None dared oppose the landlord's man. Marcus stood tall, jaw set. "If you take me, I go as a man, not as a slave. Tell your master I will fight." The collector's grin widened. "Bravery, eh? We'll see how long it lasts." The farewell. That night, the hut was filled with silence heavier than ever. Marcus sat by the fire, staring at the flickering light, while his mother sat beside him, hands clasped tightly around his. "You are my heart," she whispered. "I gave you life. Now the world takes you from me. But remember, Marcus, no matter where you go, you carry me with you." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'll come back for you. I swear it." Her eyes glistened, but she forced a smile. The world does not often let men return, but if you must go, then go with pride. Do not let them break you. She rose, disappeared into the small alcove where she kept her most precious things, and returned with a strip of cloth. It was part of his father's tunic, worn and frayed. She pressed it into Marcus's hand. "Take this. When you fight, remember who you are. Remember whose son you are." Marcus tied the strip around his wrist, a band of faded brown that felt heavier than iron. The day of departure morning came too quickly. The collector arrived with 2 guards, iron shackles in hand. Marcus stood outside the hut, waiting. He refused to kneel. Livia clung to him, her tears soaking his shoulder. "Stay strong," she whispered, voice breaking. "Stay alive." The collector shoved her aside, snapping the shackles around Marcus's wrists. Marcus did not flinch. He raised his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. As they led him away, the villagers watched silently. Some with pity, some with envy, some with fear. None spoke. None helped. Marcus did not look back until he reached the edge of the village. There he turned. His mother stood in front of their hut, small and fragile, her shawl whipping in the wind. He lifted his bound hands, clenched them into fists, and shouted so all could hear, "I will not die forgotten." The guards yanked him forward, but the words echoed long after he was gone. The road ahead. The road stretched wide and uncertain. Fields turned to hills, hills to stone. The horizon was endless, the future unknown. Marcus's wrists ached against the shackles, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. The weight of his father's words pressed in his chest. His mother's cloth clung to his wrist. Hunger, grief, and fury all boiled within him, shaping something harder than steel. He was no longer just Marcus, the farmer's son. He was Marcus, who had survived hunger. Marcus, who had carried his family on his back. Marcus, who had lost a father but gained a vow. Whatever waited ahead, arena, chains, or death, he would face it as more than a victim. He would face it as the man his father believed he could become. And in the distance, as the guards led him toward the city, toward the gladiatorial school, the dream began to take form.